This is an RNZ podcast.
Midweek Mediawatch o'clock at 22 to 9 this Wednesday, and Mr. Midweek Mediawatch, Colin Peacock, is in the chair in Wellington. Hello, Colin.
Hi there.
Are you good at riddles?
No.
Okay.
And in fact, it absolutely destroys my train of thought when I think I've ordered my thoughts of the things we're going to talk about, and suddenly I'm listening to your clues and thinking, what the hell?
Not again. It's happening again.
We don't have to do this in the form of an extended potato metaphor, do we? I'm just like your last interview.
We don't have to, but, you know, I love an extended metaphor, and if it's about potatoes, more's the better.
Just so long as you remember that the same boiling water that can make the potato soft also has the power to make the egg rock hard.
Now see, you could be a philosopher there. I actually like mashed potatoes better, not having boiled the potatoes, but having roasted them, and then you scoop out the insides and use that as the mashed potato. More work, better result, in my opinion.
Okay, then.
Right, let's talk media stuff, shall we?
Sure.
There's lots going on. This is very interesting, wider sort of media story. The Christchurch terrorist last week was in court challenging his guilty plea. And the question of how media should report on him and his situation cropped up again, Colin.
Yeah, having a think about this last week, but we didn't talk about it. I think the hearing was still going on at that point. Brenton Tarrant, his lawyers say he suffered a complete destruction of his identity in prison, leading him to an irrational decision to plead guilty that he wants to reverse. But ironically, I guess it's the elevation or the amplification of his identity, the humanization of him that has, got people concerned about. If you remember back in 2019, the Prime Minister explicitly said she wouldn't say his name, just referring to him as the terrorist, and basically that he's a person who committed a crime, and that was his identity as far as the public should talk about it. So the news media agreed a bunch of protocols at the time to make sure his name wasn't overused or details of what he did, what he believed, wasn't spoken about too much. And that really did have quite a big effect on how it was reported at the time.
Yeah, it's fascinating to sort of reflect on from a media analysis point of view. I mean, was it kind of universally accepted at the time and since? Well,
not quite. I mean, there were people who thought that it was the wrong thing to do. It wasn't necessary to restrict media in that way. In fact, any kind of group decision to behave in a certain joined up editorial way was in itself a bit creepy, never mind the context. But there was other stuff going on. Remember the outrage about the video circulating on Facebook Live, or being broadcast on Facebook Live at the first place and then circulating. ISPs clubbed together and also jointly kind of ruled that they would shut down forums hosting them, which was a bit unprecedented. So there was more heavy-handed interventions, if you like that, or some would say not heavy-handed but appropriate, depending on what you think. Also, the rule wasn't entirely, I think, stuck to. I can recall there were, and we did it on the Mediawatch program at the time, some newspaper features about his life in Dunedin and so on, details that could have given you, did give you a bit of an insight into, the part of his life, which was, I guess, some of those humanizing details that people who objected to those being public just wouldn't have liked at all. But it was interesting with the hearings last week, how some of the stuff for an international audience was making this point. So AP, for example, the international news agency, had a story which addressed this, but it was written by Charlotte Graham-McClay, an ex-RNZer. She's also worked for Guardian, New York Times.
Great journalist, yeah.
Yeah, and she went through the Royal Commission. She would have reported on the trial at the time. I think she's writing a book about it as well. And she made the point for an international audience that the hateful motivations that Tarrant cited for his crimes were just not absent from the hearing. She said lawyers both supporting and opposing his bid avoided reference to his views. Proceedings unfolded in the quiet and stolid way, these are her words, the New Zealand court cases usually do. There were signs that the court sought to limit the public's exposure to Tarrant, she said, as the New Zealand justice system had done before, and also making the point that he was only permitted to watch proceedings by video conference, and I think for the parts where he was involved. And it's interesting. She then told the international audience this is the approach New Zealand has enacted. Even news outlets just name the shooter as few times as possible. And she says this stands at odds with the publicity given to trials of racist mass killers before, such as the Norwegian murderer Anders Breivik. So interesting that this is an angle I think that would interest people overseas.
The use of the terrorist name is an interesting one. I mean, you see the text, I see the text as well. The people hear the terrorist named in media reports, during news bulletins and in programs. Many people are upset by this. His image is also circulating in reports. Isn't that at odds with these protocols that we were just talking about?
Yeah, kind of. And then Jesse Mulligan actually confronted this on the afternoons program, said we've been inundated with these messages. He did an interesting thing. He got in, this is last Friday, I think, Jane Patterson, who's the former RNZ.
That was a great idea.
Editor. Yeah, and Director of Editorial Quality and Training. And she told him, look, RNZ's policy hasn't actually changed, even though some people clearly thought it must have, and showed that sensitivity was still there. But Jesse sort of had to think about it and then asked her the question, if there's a compelling reason to limit the use of his name, why not avoid saying it completely? And this was Jane's response.
We take, for example, steps like asking our staff not to overname Tarrant, for example. So we will use his name, but we don't repeat it unnecessarily. And also in terms of our webpage, we do not put photos of him on the homepage or very prominently at the top of the story. So there is quite a deliberate and considered approach to these stories. The other element and part of the agreement, and that RNZ is continuing to do, is making sure that we have senior reporters covering these stories.
I think this is so interesting. I talked briefly to Andrew Geddes about this around about last week as well. And I am, because it almost seems as though it's more of an unofficial understanding of media companies and acknowledgement of their position. Do you think it will endure? Is there a time where it would be appropriate to normalise the case or the crime or the name?
Where do you draw that line, though? It's really difficult. Almost, I mean, maybe it's a crass comparison, but you think of that thing where the footballers in the English Premier League took a knee around the time of the Black Lives Matter movement, and then they kept doing it, and it became awkward. Like, it was someone going to say, look, when do we stop demonstrating this solidarity, and will it be bad if and when we do it? I mean, in a sense, if the media, any media acting together like that, it feels like it should be temporary, like it's a special set of circumstances, and it shouldn't become a permanent thing. I recall, like, I lived in the UK a long time ago, and working in journalism, it was the tail end of when they still had a ban on members of the political party Sinn Féin or members of the Irish Republican Army or its affiliates their words being broadcast in British terrestrially broadcast news bulletins.
Really?
Yeah. So
I didn't know that.
So the likes of Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, later, very senior politicians, but at the time their words could not, they had to be voiced up by Irish accented actors, which people thought was kind of absurd. Because
Sinn Féin didn't recognise, they didn't take their seats, right?
Well, no, yeah, but it wasn't that. It was basically Britain saying, the British government saying, we will not give oxygen to these people. We will not allow their voice to be heard on the British airwaves. Okay. It was basically a censorship thing. But, the irony being at the time, we now know that throughout this, almost all of that period when this law was in place, they were talking secretly behind the scenes to those same individuals, those representatives, about, and that was critical to the Good Friday peace agreements when they came along. Also, like, another part of the context of this, though, to bring it back to Brenton Tarrant and his crimes, was, and Charlotte Graham Maclay made this point separately in her coverage previously, saying when part of the problem here was that the tracking of extremism pre-2019, pre the mosque attack, was this sort of anxiety about Islamic radicalism or Middle Eastern sources, and that they'd gone a bit blank on the possibility of white supremacy among New Zealanders, or we now know it was an Australian working here, but from that source. And so she says, look, when official information figures, police figures released under the Official Information Act show if there is a hate-motivated crime, she says the level of offending that involves anti-Asian hate, which is a slightly different thing, is staggering. So you're saying, look, that's embedded in this. So this kind of blind spot that New Zealand had is maybe one other reason or justification to persist with, what to most people would still seem a kind of extraordinary media kind of collaboration to effectively censor part of their reporting.
All right, interesting stuff. Let's segue no easy way to do that from such a subject, but let's move on. There's also been some tension in the media about the coverage of the judicial conduct hearing of Judge Emma Aiken, who is accused of disrupting a New Zealand First meeting at the Northern Club.
Yeah, rather less hefty kind of hearing, of course. Tim Murphy, former Herald editor, co-editor of Newsroom Now, on the former Twitter platform X, said, this is shaping up, as words were, a festival of ghastliness. Which I thought was a good turn of phrase and good call. Yeah. So, we ended up with this kind of spectacle. You could tell why the media would find it funny, even though it's obviously a serious issue. A judge aged 70 taking issue with something said in a private venue, which also changes and colours the story, by a political titan of New Zealand who's aged 80. So both of them think that the other has behaved in ways they really shouldn't have. The Winston Peters speech that she overheard, and then the way the judge took issue with it, which led to her being referred to this kind of disciplinary hearing or examination. And the fact that for the media, I guess it's quite juicy in that clearly there are very significant differences in the accounts of the people on both sides of this. The New Zealand First people in their testimony saying she was yelling and her insisting she was not. And, both accounts can't be true.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? It's a little bit he said, she said at the playground.
Bit of prurience in it too, because they got to ask about, there was alcohol involved at the judge's year-end function. Not at the New Zealand First one, but that was a political event where political things were being done. But both of them, operating at this. The weird thing is this atmosphere of the, the Northern Club, right? So two private functions in a private club, but it's now
very
coming out
club.
in public because of the clash they had. But the point was made, some of these news reports referred to, the celebrity doctor David Gower, who's I think Judge Aiken's partner, that he had a pop at Peters. Also, you might have seen those videos of King's Counsel Michael Reid holding up his phone. Oh, no, they've been very widely used. They were played in the hearing, so the media have repeated these too. I think it was videos taken from the New Zealand First side of things when they're being challenged by Michael Reid, who's telling them to stop filming them. And he's saying, "I could sue you, don't touch me." And it all looks a bit intemperate. It's not a good look. And again, Tim Murphy on the X platform, another interesting observation that hadn't occurred to me till he said it. As interesting as all that is to the reading public, if this hearing is to zero in on the conduct of Judge Aiken and whether it was conduct unbecoming of a judge, then why are they spending so much time on two other people? Who obviously she is acquainted with at that function, because that shouldn't, strictly speaking, be relevant to what she may or may not have done in the Northern Club.
I mean, it's sort of, public interest versus what the people are interested in. The public is interested in, rather. Although it doesn't happen often that a judge's conduct is questioned, and especially not so publicly.
Yeah, the last time I could think of this was where back in 2016, Judge David Saunders, who's I think he died last year, but at the time he was kind of outed as a fairly dedicated nudist, and people thought this might be inappropriate if there were cases of sexual nature. I did a thing in Mediawatch about it because I thought some of the commentary was very much over the top and missing the point. Got a bit of pushback from journalists saying, no, absolutely, this is a matter of legit public interest and so on. But also in this case, we wouldn't know about it if New Zealand First hadn't effectively, maybe it's not too strong a word, narked to the authorities, and then it ended up with the Attorney General. One of the things Judge Aiken was very annoyed about was that Judith Collins had said this is appalling conduct, and she's saying she's only saying that because she's reading accounts online or in the media that Judge Aiken said were not all that accurate. But it felt to me like something that really didn't need to happen. And it turns out I was in agreement with Mike Hosking on News Talk ZB, and I thought he had a fairly decent summary on that on his show on Monday.
The incident, much disputed in terms of angst, animosity and volume, shows the judge in a very poor light. It was none of her business, and you don't go round running commentary on other people's evenings. Then again, you don't go dobbing interlopers into attorneys general, which is what has happened, and next thing you know, you've got a legal circus where a person's career is potentially about to be blown to pieces. Also disturbing for me is the casual observer is the Chief District Court Judge's role. Look this up and read it.
Yeah, so there Mike Hosking was talking about the Chief District Court Judge helping draft an apology by Judge Aiken, and that apparently involved two media advisors And Judge Aiken's words were amended so as to avoid offending New Zealand First or kind of placate them so they might not take it further. So Mike Hosking said that weakness worries me a bit. And also Judge Aiken should be able to have her voice in there. And Mike Hosking said she's not a 13-year-old, she's a judge. And he's right about that.
Do you think we'll ever really know what happened in the Northern Club? Like when the panel rules, will there be another round of breathless coverage?
I don't know. It may be that they only kind of give a ruling on whether it was something that requires disciplinary action or whether they consider it was unjudge-like conduct or whatever the legal terminology is. Then I guess sort of Paul Goldsmith as a Minister of Justice will have to do something about that. But,
Unbecoming of the judiciary.
Yeah. Is that it? Okay. But, it sounds good. Sounds right. Let's go with that. We wouldn't be any good in a courtroom, would we? That level of precision, making stuff up. But no, I guess it will go away. I mean, I think it's the stuff that's been exposed in the hearings that the media have had to been able to go on. But yeah, a lot of people don't come out reputationally well of that. And again, to go back to Mike Hosking saying, if you wanted to think of these judges as champagne-swilling, self-serving snobs, they haven't done a lot to dissuade us. And he says, but then again, New Zealand First now look like petty, point-scory, losery group of narcs who don't mind wrecking people's lives. So no one wins.
I do quite like it, Colin, I have to say, when stories that are, I know that this is a serious story. There is this kind of silly element to it, maybe, in the eyes of the public beholding it, are covered by journalists of great distinction and with a kind of gravitas in the tone and the technique of covering it. Like Tim Murphy. Tim Murphy's coverage of this has been absolutely terrific, I think. I wonder whether you feel the same.
You could sort of spot the weirdness of it straight away. Like that thing of like saying things that when you read it back, think, oh yeah, I guess that's kind of obvious. I should have, but it isn't until someone says it. Yeah. But I wondered if Steve Broadnius might have turned up because the colour in it felt like something he might do. Yeah. Or his like he likes to cover some of these court cases too, like the Polkinghorne. Okay, that's a court case. Of course, this isn't. This is just a hearing, so that's a critical difference. But he did do a secret diary thing, which Newsroom have published, and it's clearly satire, but it's very blunt. And some of it, I wonder if I would have published, the references to champagne swilling and so on, attached to certain individuals in a fairly direct way. I mean, it's clearly satire, but I don't know. It ended like this with the head of the Judiciary panel saying, thank you, Judge Aiken. We will convene next week for more of the same. In the meantime, let's discuss these matters with counsel. Seeing as it's Friday afternoon, let's adjourn to the Northern Club. It's nice and private. Only the right kind of people go there. I was taken there to lunch by accident because I met someone walking up the hill who was going there and said, do you want to come and join me for lunch? And I was wearing shorts at the time, so I was admitted, but I was seated in a place right down the back. So where I could not be seen from the street or by other members.
With a long tablecloth. All right, 4 minutes at the end, Colin, to talk about AI in the news. Another week, another AI controversy. A Guardian writer, I find this really interesting. A Guardian writer has been accused of using ChatGPT or something like that to cover the Winter Olympics. What do you think? If it's true, does it matter? Especially for factual coverage of sporting events? Who cares?
Well, I don't know. See, with this case, it's not quite a factual piece, right? Because, and in fact, I should say The Guardian, this was just a journalist who spotted it, said this definitely looks like AI. And when you look at it, some of it does.
It reads pretty AI to me.
And these quite long and lame subheadings, which so it doesn't quite look right. But the piece is billed as an explainer, right, by this journalist who does specialise. It's all about figure skating. So he appears to be an absolute expert. I've never heard it, don't follow the sport. But if it's billed as analysis, you would think it's probably not right for stuff to be generated. And that's always the line in policy, isn't it? Is it being used as some sort of assistant with human oversight and ability to rewrite, or is it generating stuff? So I don't know what the answer, but The Guardian says you're wrong. This is not AI. Yes. So they absolutely deny it. But it is strange because there's another piece about the same dominant figure skater so unexpectedly and sensationally blowing it at the Winter Olympics. And this piece is completely different. It's got the cool title on it, Fall of the Quad God. Quad was the event. The brilliant American, he was expected to glide to gold. Tough to watch such a gifted athlete discover the ruthlessness of his sport. The dawning realization, destiny he had controlled for 3 years had slipped beyond his reach in the blinding span of 4.5 catastrophic minutes. AI is not going to write like that, but this journalist, Brian Armin Graham, at the Milano Ice Skating Arena, he's there, does write a very different piece about the same event, which doesn't quite tally up with that explainer.
These large language models, they really have a lot to answer for, if you ask me, Cole. For example, now any use of the M dash, the longer dash, which ChatGPT is famous for using
Yes.
really, really regularly, is viewed with suspicion. And so too is the perfectly good sentence construction. It's not just X, it's Y, which is a perfectly good sentence construction. But now it's like a red flag. Oh, yep, you've run this through ChatGPT. Good grief.
That could be true, and that does it just heightens people's sense of suspicion, and in a way takes the fun out of both writing and reading if you're going to do it that way. But I don't know. There was another in the to and fro on the X platform about this, where the writer of this sort of pleads like, "Don't have a go at this journalist. He's really great." And saying, "Well, mate, you've put it on Twitter. That's
really
that's
landed
the origin of pylons. Like I think that ship has sailed, and you threw it in the water."
That ship sailed, Admiral. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But someone else who joined the discussion said, "Look, I don't have any major hang-ups about using this to sharpen up text or reduce the length and make it more packageable for reprinting or whatever was the use might have been." But he said if it comes into common usage, you might just get distinctive writing. Ends up being, his description was this kind of mid-Atlantic style. I don't quite know what's meant, but probably American really, and of a similar length of sentences, that much more mediated, sub-edited style of writing their newspapers are famous for. So if widespread use of LLMs or whatever for this purpose, even if they don't do a great deal of harm in an area like sport where the facts aren't in dispute, maybe, but yeah, it could just level out the style to the point where it all becomes a bit of a mush.
Slop, as they call it.
Like a soft boiled potato.
Colin Peacock. It ends as it begins. Thank you. Catch you next Wednesday.
Thank you. Can't wait.